Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
Just the other day I was talking to a non-farmer, and this non-farmer just asked me, how come when you're driving around the countryside you see great big piles of grain in some places, and then I also see farmers or elevators putting grain into bins? Why do they have the piles?
Well, that's a pretty easy answer, Brian, because they don't have enough bin space. You know, if you had bin space and you could put all your grain safely inside, in our country, that would be the practice.
And that's exactly what I said to this non-farmer, but then the follow-up question was, well, if they put them outside in these big piles, don't they spoil?
First of all, when are we doing this? When are we piling grain outside? We're piling it outside when it's cold.
Hopefully.
And, you know, when we're thinking about fall, if it's very early in the fall, we could still have some warm weather, but chances are this late into the fall, we're going to get cool temperatures and cool nights, and we can put grain outside and we aren't going to have all that heat. If you get two things, you're going to have spoilage. You can have heat and you can have moisture. And if you can pile the grain when it's cool, that's one of the big things that you can avoid. Then the other thing is how you pile that grain. If you have one peak and you get some rain, now the water can run off. If you have multiple peaks, that's where you get pockets where water is going to settle and penetrate down into that pile. That's where you would tend to see more spoilage.
And obviously, if you have lots of days where you have some moisture, that's a bad thing, as opposed to one big rain and then you have lots of sun after that. And no matter how you do it, you're going to have some spoilage when piling the grain outside. And so what every farmer weighs out and what every grain elevator weighs out is, how much am I losing to spoilage? How much does that cost me versus how much does it cost to put up another bin, and how often would I actually use that bin? So I think about our own farm, for example, and for our dad, he never ever wanted to pile any grain, which is great. We didn't have any real major spoilage risks or anything like that as long as we had the grain to the right moisture when it went into the bin. But because of that, we would always overbuild for bins. So we always had extra bin space, it seemed like. No, I shouldn't say always. 9 years out of 10, we would have extra bin space. And so that's kind of the thing. Do you want to weigh out that cost of, well, I might have an empty bin there, or am I going to risk losing it putting extra grain into a pile?
Okay, well, there's another reason that farmers may pile their grain outside. Let's say that the grain elevator that they're hauling to, they're big long lines with lots of guys dumping grain, and they don't want to drive their truck into that elevator, wait in line for a few hours before they can dump one truck and then take it back out to the field to fill it up again. So sometimes farmers will say, you know what, I'm just going to pile it up. Then I can just keep rolling on my farm with harvest. I can get all the grain harvested, and then after harvest, I can get busy working on hauling that grain pile in. So I'm only going to pile it out there for maybe a few weeks at the most, and I'm going to pick it right back up and haul it in. Now, you can say, well, that seems like a lot of extra work, and it certainly is a lot of extra work cleaning that pile back up and hauling it all back in, but it could still save a farmer a considerable amount of time because he could get his harvest all done, and then instead of waiting in line at the elevator to dump, he can wait till everybody's done harvesting and there are no trucks hauling into the elevator. Well, then he can dump his grain, go grab another load, and run right back to the elevator again.
And the other thing is, on average, elevators will pay more once harvest is all done as opposed to what they actually pay during harvest. I guess one last thing I was going to mention here, rather than piling grain up, some farmers will use bags to temporarily store their grain. Rather than having the investment of putting up a new grain bin, they just use these bags as a temporary measure as opposed to having to bring that grain back to a grain site or to the grain elevator right away.
Well, it's certainly a common sight to see grain piled around the country, especially when yields are good. But to get those good yields, you have to control weeds like our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?